A biblical perspective on life, culture, and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, today we're looking at Hollywood, and we're asking if it's possible to succeed in Hollywood without losing your soul. Our special guest has worked in and around Hollywood for 38 years, and he now wants to equip the next generation of movie makers to pursue their dreams of making the biggest and best movies. So Ted Baehr is the founder of Movie Guide. It serves audiences all around the world, approximately 89 million people. And in the US, 1 in 3 parents use Movie Guide to choose movies for their families. So our conversation today is all about how we can succeed in Hollywood without losing our soul. And Ted, I want to welcome you to 2020 today.
Oh, it's great to be with you. I'll be physically in Australia in 2 weeks and speaking in Sydney, so that's going to be fun. And then visiting my son in Tasmania. He lives down there, so with 10 of my 18 grandchildren, so it's wonderful.
Gee, he's doing his bit for the country and probably the whole world there. 10 children in Tasmania. That sounds like a very busy life for your son.
It's busy, and they have students come and stay there. It's a hostel, and then they tell them about Christ, and they help them develop a theological perspective and know the Lord and make him known.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Ted, in case some of our listeners aren't familiar with you, tell us a little bit about your story and how you came to start Movie Guide.
Well, my story, I'll try to make it very short because you and I were talking about it before the show. I grew up in the entertainment industry. My parents were movie stars. My father starred in 62 movies. He had a stage name, Robert Allen, Bob Tex Allen. He won the box office award in 1936. I used to go into Columbia Pictures, and they had his picture right on the wall, and he did a lot of different movies. He did about 9 cowboy movies out of the 62. And then after World War II, he didn't want to go back to Hollywood, so he starred in Broadway, and I was born in 1946. I grew up a Broadway brat. I guess that's the best way to say it. And my mother died when I was young. So he got pursued by a lot of women, and 4 of them had come to Christ through Billy Graham, and they wanted to bring him to Christ so that he'd go to Christian events. They'd take him, he'd take me, I'd walk out, and finally somebody got me to read the New Testament, and I came to Christ, and a week later I married my wife, and then 4 children and 18 grandchildren. And this ministry, I found out about the ministry from the golden age of Hollywood, the George Heinrich, who had run the Protestant Film Commission, and they kept movies clean from 1933 to 1965.
Okay, so there's a lot there, and it's so interesting. Did your dad serve in World War II? Is that why he left Hollywood when World War II was on? Was he conscripted to serve?
Yes, he was overseas in North Africa and in Italy in World War II, and it's a long story. I've just written a book about him. It's my 43rd book, and I've written my 44th book. And John Wayne, scriptwriter, nobody remembers John Wayne anymore, but his scriptwriter is a good friend. And she said, "Oh, this is the best book." So since I don't want to hear that it's the best book, because I teach this stuff, I was head of a department at Berkeley and head of art, so I want to find out negative reviews. So I sent it to 2 of my best-selling friends who are best-selling authors to get their criticism. If they all 3 of them say it's a great book, then I'll publish it.
Yeah, amazing. Because there were a number of Hollywood stars who did serve in World War II, weren't there? And some of them went on to do really well in Hollywood after the war. And I used to wonder, is that because they were exposed to such extreme emotions and feelings and experiences, and they were somehow able to channel that into their acting?
There's another side to that too. Hollywood in my father's day was controlled by the major studios, Warner Brothers, Disney, Paramount Pictures, Columbia Pictures. My father signed first with Warner Brothers, and they had what they called a stable of comedy stars. His first movie was a Marx Brothers movie where he played the romantic lead. And then they had a stable of singing stars, and he sang, and that's when he won the 62, the box office award. And then they had a stable. So in World War II, the people who went off to war came back without jobs in Hollywood. which is one reason he stayed in New York, but he loved live audiences. So Jimmy Stewart, who became a very committed Christian and used to go to Hollywood Presbyterian Church every week, he'd come a little late so nobody'd see him, and he walked around the streets of L.A. and Hollywood for a couple of years without being able to get a job. All those jobs. When my father left for the war, they hired somebody to take his place named William Holden. When he left the cowboy movies, they hired a guy. He could ride and rope because he'd been in the cavalry. They hired a guy named Roy Rogers. So those jobs were all taken, and you had to come back and get yourself into the industry. Now, as far as the acting is concerned, I'm sure it influenced our acting. I studied with Strasberg, and I understand you've got to emote and you've got to feel the feelings, and I'm sure they felt it more. I had a friend, Gene Roddenberry. I hired him to do a project for ABC where he was working. He had done a series called Star Trek, which failed when it first came out.
Really? What year was that? When did it fail?
It failed in the 1960s. And he was a California highway patrolman. He used to write his scripts sitting on the side of the road. And he said the best writers were highway patrolmen and firemen because they'd seen life and death firsthand. And of course, that would have been true to people who went off to World War II or went off to the Korean War.
Yeah, and look, we can even delve into politics and say, JFK served in World War II as well, and some of his crew mates died on that patrol boat he was stationed on, and arguably he was a great president because he obviously loved America, but also had really seen some hard things in his life.
Right, and they made a great movie about him too.
PT 109.
Yeah, I was just listening to the Warner Brothers story. The interesting thing is, because I've grown up in this industry, and my family's been in the industry almost 100 years, I hear the dates in books like the Warner story or, Empire of Their Own, and the dates are wrong. They don't understand the dates. And I inherited all the files from the Protestant Film Office. So I'm listening along and I'm saying, no, that didn't happen then. And they were making full-length feature films in the 1890s. 1897, they made a full-length Passion play of the Lumiere brothers. And then Pathé brothers next year made a Passion play, and somebody else made, I think, a Selig. So they were making great movies. And I'd been asked, I was head of a department at Berkeley, head of a department at City University, New York. So I was asked about doing movies about sort of sci-fi and religion. Did they intersect? And the man who was in charge of the project from Harvard didn't know anything about the movie industry. And I started talking about 1898, Jorge Mallet, who was featured in the movie Hugo. He was making some great sci-fi, Trip to the Moon, and he didn't understand that. Finally, he was booted because he didn't know what the history of Hollywood was. And they published the article in this very academic, every day I get a notice that one of my papers and articles and books has been recommended by some academic group. But we're not academic today, so we don't have to worry about it. Hugo's a great movie, by the way.
Well, I think you got to throw into the mix there too. I'm sure I've read somewhere they made a movie about Ned Kelly in Australia a long time ago, and it's sometimes listed as one of the first full-length feature films ever made. Have you ever heard that up in your part of the world?
Well, here's what happened with the films and what became very confusing until recently. And actually, Australia did solve some of the problems. It would cost, the original film stock, if you want to hear this, was silver nitrate, like Jorge Mallet, which you've heard of, did over 1,000 films. And because it was silver nitrate, when you deposited it with the Copyright Office, it was so expensive that instead of depositing 6 reels, which would have been a fortune, you deposit a little 7-minute, 15-minute clip. So people who wrote books about the industry for many years thought these people were only making 7-minute clips.
Okay.
And then, later they did it in nitrate film, and that's acetate. And then that was much safer. Actually, buildings blew up. And in Australia, they found a couple of movies that were really old movies in the middle of the desert at a theater. I didn't know you had a theater in the middle of the desert, but you did. And and it was a perfect place to preserve movies. So some of these movies have been recovered now, and they're just absolutely wonderful. So thank you, Australia.
Well, there you go. And been a couple of Australian actors that have made their name in Hollywood over the years as well. And I think the first one was Errol Flynn. Do you remember that name, Errol Flynn?
Oh, yeah, know him well. Unfortunately, he drank and caroused himself into oblivion. And Jack Warner, who hired my father originally when Errol was young, but he was really drawn out, and nobody liked him. Nobody wanted to, I shouldn't tell you this, nobody wanted to work with him. He was very difficult. He was from Tasmania, actually, where my son is. And
we won't hold that against him.
Jack Warner hired him. I think he died in the middle of the production. He did not last too long. So, but he did great swashbuckling epics. Later, his dramatic films, when he could no longer do swashbuckling epics, and were not so good. So there you go. But you have great actors who are, sort of adopted Australians, like Mel Gibson and Hugh Jackman. And Hugh Jackman actually, I'm a little annoyed. He kissed one of my 18 grandchildren, so I she was just a baby. So he wants to run for office. That's what we say, that politicians will always kiss the baby to
that's
get
it.
the attention. Hugh is a good guy.
He seems like a good guy. I've never met him, but I'll give you some trivia about Errol Flynn as well. He actually spent some time in Papua New Guinea. I know your son spent some time in Papua New Guinea. So Errol Flynn was actually digging for gold up there before he was a famous movie star. I don't know if you know that. And that perhaps shaped him as an individual as well. Maybe that's where he got his wild side from. I'm not sure.
I think he probably got it from Tasmania. You do have an animal there that I was listening to the cry of the animal today, trying to describe why he was called a devil. Yeah. And because his sounds are so bad. So, that.
Well, they used to terrify people, those animals.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we can go down that rabbit trail too, and I won't do it. But the reason we get a lot of Australian stars now is because the state of California, which is sometimes as loony as you can get, said that agents can't check on the price. Where, for instance, some American actor may come in and say, my last movie, what did you make? Oh, 20 million. Well, up until about 10 years ago, the agent could call the other agent, and CAA could call ICBM or whatever, and say, how much did he make? Oh, he made 6 million. And, it still sounds like a lot of money. But when they said that, I went to NYU Law School. I brought my daughter to listen to these guys. She said, what are you going to do? He said, well, we don't need American actors. We can hire Australian and English actors because they speak better anyway. So there you go. California killed the American actors' careers.
Well, there you go. I didn't know that bit of trivia. And if you go to England, they'll tell you that Australians can't speak English very well, that they're the only ones who can actually speak proper English. So interesting that Americans think we speak good English. But I want us to move on. Sorry?
I studied at Cambridge, and I spoke at Parliament. And, there are a lot of, actually at Parliament, and there are a lot of people, a lot of accents in England, which are different. I also taught at Sheffield, so and I spoke at Oxford. So there are a lot of different accents in England.
There are, there are. But Ted, I want us to just really move on and talk about Movie Guide, and also talk about what you're doing now with your life, how you're wanting to raise up a new generation, encourage a new generation of filmmakers to really mix it in Hollywood and not to withdraw from Hollywood, because there is a real perception, isn't there, among many Christians that Hollywood is a very dark place and something to be avoided, and even the entertainment industry. Some Christians don't even like looking at anything, do they? Because they just feel like there's so much content in there which is not very Christian.
Well, there are a lot of Christians in Hollywood, and when we started the Movie Guide in 1985, there was one movie with strong positive Christian content. Last year, 70% of the top 10 had strong Christian content, and I can go over and give you each one of them because that's what people want. And there was just a big article in the Wall Street Journal that Hollywood has started moving toward making those broad audience films with more Christian, with prayer, with talking about Jesus, they're not totally evangelistic, but some of them are pretty good. Like one that did $1.4 billion at the box office a year ago. The story was about the devil trying to conquer the kingdom of heaven by marrying the bride of Christ, and it was a powerful story. He even had a lake of fire and was suspending people. So there are a lot of Christians in Hollywood. The difference is that the other side are very vocal. When we started the ministry, there's a book out about the whole history. The LGBTQ GLAAD started. They started by going into the offices of ABC, the head of ABC, and throwing all his books out the 50th story window or whatever, and throwing his desk and destroying things. We started by saying, we can show you how to get a bigger audience. There's at that time, there were 160 million people who go to church every week. Now it's about 114 million, but there are only 7 million people going to movies. So that means you've got at least 10 times more people going to church than movies. So it's an audience. Hollywood.
Well,
makes
that's amazing. I want you to repeat that stat, please. I've never heard that before. Repeat that stat about people going to church as opposed to people going to movies now.
Yeah, well, people look at the negative. The negative is the number of people going to church per week has gone from 160 million to 114 million or 112 million. But I look at the positive. The positive is that we're much bigger than the box office. And Hollywood makes movies for groups. They make movies for Spanish-speaking groups. They make movies for Korean-speaking groups, all sorts of groups. So we just tell them, you got this gigantic audience out there, and it contains a lot of these other groups. And if you make movies for them, you're going to do well. So we've got movies coming out that have very positive portrayals of Christians. And, we give them awards. And we teach people how to get in there. And actually, every week we have 2 or 3 of the top people at Hollywood come in and teach the young students that we now have training with us to go into the executive offices. So we've had the co-owner of Legendary Pictures that did Dune. Tomorrow we have the chief financial officer of Netflix coming in. The new head of production of Netflix is a very committed Christian who's been to our events. So we just see a lot of changes. Now, that doesn't mean they're not doing bad films, because Hollywood wants to exploit every marketplace. But it does mean that they understand, and the Wall Street Journal said that today, that they need to reach that big audience if they're going to make money. Warner Brothers employs 60,000 people on the lot. They've got to be able to pay those people, and they can't pay them if they're going to be making woke movies. If you go woke, you go broke.
Ted, tell me, why did you start Movie Guide? What was the epiphany for you to actually launch Movie Guide?
Well, as I said before, I've been in the industry all my life, but I was on the wrong side. I was one of those bad guys. I grew up as a Broadway brat. And when I came to Christ, I had just funded 5 feature films, put together the funding for Canon Films. One of them was Oliver Stone's first film. And the first thing that God convicted me of is marrying my wife, which was the best thing I did in my life. And then the next one was, how do we bring some sense and sensibility to Hollywood? During the golden age of Hollywood, when Mr. Smith went to Washington, it was a wonderful life, and the bells of St. Mary rang out. And that all left in the 1960s because there used to be 2 major church film offices, Catholic and Protestant, and then the Jewish Defense League. And they kept movies clean. And then they left in 1965. And you went from 1965 to 1968. You went from 100% films that you could take your family to, Sound of Music, The Greatest Story Ever Told. We can go through a whole litany of great films. And then 3 years later, you had the first X-rated film, the first film with LGBTQ sex, etc. So all of that. And the box office went from 44 million weekly attendance down to 17 million, and it's never recovered. So what we did, when I came to Christ, I said, this is my home, this is my industry. How do I reach people and tell Hollywood they have to start doing better? And so we said, here's the way you can make more money at the box office. And we started training people to be media-wise. Movie Guide is a tool to help parents help their children develop media wisdom, and it's a very effective tool. To put myself through seminary, I worked I worked as head of the TV department at City University, and we brought 62 professors together in the 70s and did the first media literacy course. So we look at movies in 150 criteria, very Christian, very theological, but we put it in simple terms, and we help parents to say, is this something our kids want to watch? And we want them to get to the point that their children are saying they don't want to watch it. So I'm shocked all the time that our biggest audience is mothers. That's to be expected. But the next biggest audience is young women between 14 and 24. So they're looking for discernment. They're looking for wisdom. And since we reach 89 million, that's a lot of people.
Yeah, amazing. So let's go back to those movie houses that the Protestants had one, the Catholics had one, and the Jewish League had one. When you say they kept movies clean, how did they do that? Did they have a government mandate to regulate the industry, or was it just that they had a loud voice and that the different movie makers listened to them? How did that work?
Well, in the beginning of the movie industry, a lot of the people in the industry were Christian. The Pathé brothers, the Lumiere brothers, Selig, a lot of them were Catholic. I mean, then we can fight about theology forever. And then that changed in the 1910s, and it went off the deep end. And there were many cities and places where they were putting in ratings board and banned in Boston, banned in Baltimore. And the movie industry set up an organization, the Motion Picture Distribution Association, which is the MPAA now, to get them unbanned and to get them be able to play their movies. And finally, three churchmen, Catholic, Joseph Breen, Martin Quigley, Daniel Day Breen, came in and said, Daniel Day Lord, excuse me, came in and said, we can show you how to make movies that are going to reach these audiences, that you won't have any empty seats in the theater. Same thing we do, because we inherited all those files. So they just showed them how to reach abroad. They didn't have any government, they didn't have any censorship. All they could say is how many empty seats. If you put, this scene in, you're going to lose a lot of people at the box office, and they still lose a lot of people. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't an exception that comes in like Deadpool and does well, but you have movies that are extraordinarily full of faithful content, like Inside Out 2. You've seen Inside Out 2, right?
I actually haven't seen. I've got to confess to you, I haven't seen it.
Well, what it is a young girl, Riley, and a big sign, there's their emotions running, and the emotions are really the fruit of the Spirit at this point. And joy is running her whole emotional status. And then it signs, puberty. So then anxiety takes over, kicks out joy. Joy, is trying to get back into the control room. At one point, she prays. She gets back into the control room. Anxiety is going crazy. She gets anxiety under control. And joy of the Lord is our strength. So Riley recognizes that she's been controlled by anxiety. She asks forgiveness for her friends that she insulted. Her life turns around. So the joy of the Lord is our strength. And it made over $1 billion, $1.4 billion, $1.5 billion at the box office.
Man, what an amazing story. And were there Christians behind that, or they just consulted with Christian writers to help write the script for that?
When you talk about Christians in Hollywood, you talk about Christians everywhere. The head of the studio, who's a friend, I trained the people who founded Pixar way back in the 1970s. There's a book called The Pixar Touch that talks about that. That was a New York Times best-selling, and it talks about me on 2 or 3 different pages and how I trained him. But the new head of it is a Presbyterian. That doesn't mean anything. And he's made some goofy movies. He's just decided, I write him every time. I contact him. I say, Pete, you got to get back to making movies that reach your family and friends in Minnesota. He's from Minnesota, and he's done that. And so sometimes they listen to you, sometimes they don't, Andrew. It's not, all we do is prove to them that they can do better by doing good.
Yeah, well done, Ted. That's such a good and important role you play. And Ted Bow, I want to welcome you back to 2020 today.
Oh, it's great to be with you. This has been fascinating. You're You're an excellent host, and it's fun.
Oh, thanks, Ted. Well, you're an excellent guest, so I think you and I need to catch up more often and talk about old movies together. But, we've actually had quite a few people call in, Ted, so I do want to go to our callers now, and they've got some questions they want to ask you. And the first one is a person from WA. His name is Joshua, and he's from Fern Hill in WA. Joshua, are you there?
Hey, mate, how you going?
Good. First up, Joshua, you got to tell us, where is Fern Hill, WA? One of the great things about this show, Ted, is we have an audience all across Australia, and I'm fascinated in some of the places our audience live. Where is Fern Hill, Joshua?
I'll start off with a bit of a correction. It's Herne Hill, Herne, and it's in the southwest of WA.
There you go, Herne Hill. Sorry, mate, so we had a mistype there. So Herne Hill in the southwest of WA. And have you got a question or a comment for Ted today?
You mentioned before just about movies that God might have spoken through, whether they're Christian or otherwise. I've had a history of being into the occult and being a bit Satanistic and that sort of thing, and I just kind of wanted, I don't know, maybe to encourage people that no matter how hard that I tried, God still managed to speak to me through the movies that I watched, whether it be I loved a lot of horror movies, but maybe particularly one that spoke to me. It wasn't a horror movie, but the Last Samurai. That was a really touching movie for me.
Tom Cruise.
Yeah, Tom Cruise.
So what was it about that movie that really touched you?
Particularly, I'd say it was maybe one moment in there where Ken Watanabe, he plays, I can't remember the character's name now, one of the samurai, and he mentions that, I suffer from a lot of anxiety, and I've spent a lot of time with perfectionism, and how God spoke to me when he said that he was looking at a cherry blossom tree, saying that you can spend your whole life looking for a perfect blossom, and it won't be a wasted life. I don't know, it's a bit superficial, but it spoke to me in a way that's like, I don't have to keep pursuing perfection, because, I should try to be as good as perfect as I can, but obviously I'll never be perfect like God is, and that's his job, not mine. And it was sort of, a bit of a comfort, and so the Holy Spirit spoke to me through a lot of things that weren't.
Well, I love that, Joshua. I want to stop there. Ted, have you got a comment for that? That, who would have thought that a comment about a cherry blossom tree in the Tom Cruise movie, The Last Samurai, that God could speak through that scene in a movie to help a young man deal with anxiety? Have you got a comment about that, Ted?
Well, I see this all the time. When I did The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe on CBS television, we got a lot of letters, but one man said, my wife's been nagging me about Christianity all my life, and I saw the scene of Aslan in the stone table, and I finally realized what the resurrection is. And we get a lot of people saying that one scene touched their heart and got them to understand something that they had not seen before. I'm not sure the Last Samurai has that many great elements in it, but I do remember the film well. And of course, Top Gun 2 is one of the favorite films of many people out there. So Tom has done some good films, and he's surprising to me. I've interviewed Tom Cruise. He is a very vibrant interview, and just like his character in one of his movies, he came in and jumped over the couch. It was just me and him, with the camera crew and everything offsite. And he jumps over the couch, and he's showing me that he's still young and youthful and et cetera. Well, I'm not. I'm 78, so I would never jump over the couch to come talk to Tom Cruise. So there you go.
But you know what? I'm going to stick up for The Last Samurai because I'm with Joshua. I thought it was a great movie that illustrated Western decadence, had failed. This young American goes to Japan, learns about discipline and dedication and joined a community of samurais, and his life turned around and he became a great hero in that movie. And I'm like you, Josh. I'm not saying God spoke to me through that movie, but I did really enjoy it, and I thought there was actually a good message in there which contained a lot of truth. But Joshua, have you got another comment or question for Ted today as well?
I suppose, it's put me on the spot a little bit hard, but maybe just asking about, the culture of, the rumours, I suppose, of, sexual abuse and that sort of thing in Hollywood. Is it sort of on the decline now, I suppose? Because just I've heard a lot of people sort of saying that there is a big uprising of more virtuous films and that sort of thing, and hopefully the more dark side of Hollywood is now starting to take a bit more of a backseat rather than being at the forefront all the time. And so it's just a thought: do you reckon it's on the turn now? Is Hollywood going to become a more virtuous industry going from here on out?
Yeah, that's a good question, Ted. I'm going to repeat the question in case you couldn't hear it. Joshua's asking, is the culture within Hollywood itself, not necessarily on movie sets, but just the behind-the-scenes culture? Obviously, a lot of the Me Too movement exposed a lot of abuse, especially with young women. And he's asking, is that getting cleaned up now since Me Too? Has the culture behind the scenes improved from what you're seeing and hearing, Ted?
Well, everywhere you go, there's always wheat and chaff. I mean, I think that's a biblical principle. Most of the people that I know, especially at the high levels of the studios, I mentioned some of them before, Dan Lin from Taiwan, who's now the head of production at Netflix, speaks at Christian events. He's come to our events. The head of the CFO for Netflix is speaking tomorrow. But Netflix does some really good movies and television, and it does some really bad. So, the wheat and the chaff is always growing up together. And there's a principle here that I tried to illustrate, is that Hollywood wants to exploit every market, and getting them to stop doing that is going to be hard. They want to exploit the Hispanic market. My wife was Argentine. Her mother didn't want to learn English. She came from a good family in Argentina. Her father was a great doctor who became head of the biggest medical. So there are people that don't want to leave their culture. They like to see the African-American films. Tyler Perry makes African-American films. So Hollywood wants to exploit all those, and they want to have, I can't tell you the name of them. They call a certain number of films for young teenage boys a name that is very derogatory, and they're trying to make movies for those teenage boys. And those movies are like throwing gasoline on their propensity for wanting sex and violence and everything else. So they are trying to reach that market in the worst way possible. Now, the answer to that is the most powerful person in Hollywood is not Dan Lin, the new head of production at Netflix or whatever. It's the teenager who goes to movies. Most movies are visited by people between 14 and 30. When you get to be 30, if you get married, you can't afford to go to a movie anymore. And you'd rather stay home. Now, why would this kid go to movies when they could stay home and see great movies on their parents' system? Because their parents are there. They don't want to see their parents, and they want to invite their girl or boyfriend out, and they want to be able to go to a dark theater. So what we try to do is help parents teach their kids to be media wise, so they can ask the questions, is this movie good? Is the hero a good hero or a bad hero? Is Rambo a good hero? Is the hero of Hacksaw Ridge a good hero? He's willing to give up his life to save people, but he doesn't want to kill people. So there's a lot of good questions that you can ask to start thinking about the movie and to make a difference and to make wise choices.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joshua, we've got a couple other callers waiting, but I want to thank you for calling in today, and I want to leave you with a quote from The Last Samurai, one of my favourite. At the very end of the movie, the Emperor says to Tom Cruise's character, "Tell me about his death," about that samurai who died. And Tom Cruise says, "I will tell you about his life." Great line, great movie. Joshua, I want to thank you so much for calling 2020 today. We've got other callers waiting, though, and one of them is Richard from Austinville. Richard, are you there?
G'day, guys. Had a couple of quick questions. I just wanted to ask, what do you see as the future of the film industry in America and globally?
That is a great question, Ted. You'd hear that one. His question is, what do you see as the future for the movie industry in Australia, in the world? Sorry.
Well, the movie industry has always been changing since the beginning of the movie industry and since the beginning of communications. What you're really talking about is story. And do you have a story, like they were just talking about The Last Samurai, that captures your imagination and holds your attention? And those great stories were told in the past, around the campfire. They were told through books, and now they're being told through movies. And they're going to be another medium to tell them. So what you're really teaching people when you're teaching people how to use the medium, a lot of schools are what they call in Germany technical Hochschule. They're showing you how to hold the camera. But that's not what it is. Cameras changed radically. I was head of a department at City University, New York, head of a department at Berkeley. What doesn't change is storytelling. And storytelling is the heart of what you want to do to capture an audience.
There you go. So did you catch that, Richard?
Yeah, yep. I also had another question, the new movie, I don't know if you've seen it, the new movie Civil War in the last couple of months. It's kind of like a modern-day depiction of Civil War today in America. Very controversial one. What was your take on that movie?
Well, we review every movie, so we review 100% of the movies. So I did not review that movie. As I remember from our review, we said that the movie suggested that it was going to be a major indictment of society, and then it turned out to be nothing but an escape film. I think that's what it is. You'd have to go to movieguide.org and look it up and see what our review said, and I'd have to do the same thing, and I'm not going to do that because I'm looking now at the program at 2020, and I want to stay here and not drift off to someplace else.
Yeah. Okay.
Good on you, Richard. Well, thank you so much for calling in today. It's always good hearing your voice, mate, and you have a good day.
Yep, thank you.
And we've got another caller waiting who's been very patient, and that is Anne from the Gold Coast in Queensland here. Anne, are you there?
Hello.
Have you got a question or a comment for Ted today?
No, I just want to review a couple of movies that I thought that just gave me such a time. And one was Bloom. If you remember that one, that's about this lady who fell. It's a true story. And then this magpie came into their lives, and how he helped change her attitude and understanding what she was going through, and the whole family.
Yeah, that was a great movie. I don't know if Ted's aware of that one. Have you heard of the movie Bloom, Ted, which has got a magpie in it?
I have, and again, that's not one I reviewed, but we did review it. So sorry about that.
I've heard a lot of people say that they got a lot out of that movie. And what's the other one, Andy, you want to talk about?
Jesus Revolution that we had about Greg, and why it was good because Greg Laurie, it showed Greg Laurie and him being young and how he came to know the Lord, and how the Lord used other people, in his life to bring him to the Lord, and what happened and how it grew, and people came to know the Lord through that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I'm so glad you brought up that movie, Jesus Revolution, because, Ted, we do need to talk about that, because it does seem like there's been some great Christian movies made. And, Anne, I want to thank you so much for calling 2020 today as well. I'm so glad that you brought up Jesus Revolution. Tell me about the movie Jesus Revolution, Ted. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, we gave it an award last year, so as one of the best movies. The Irwin brothers have been friends of mine for a long time, because their father had a radio show in Alabama, and I used to do it every month in Alabama. So I've known them since they were, probably in just a gleam in their father's eyes. They say on stage every time they come and get an award, and you can see the award at movieguide.org, they say that we taught them a lot about what you have to do, because they used to do fractured plots and didn't do that well. I'm still trying to get them to the point that they reach bigger audiences. The average Hollywood movie costs $160 million. It has to do 2.5 times negative cost to break even. That's because if it does 2 times, the theater takes 50%, so it can't break even. And then the distributor takes 50% of the 50%, so it's got to do at least $600 million before it breaks even. And this last time I looked, Jesus Revolution, that we gave an award to, had done, at the time of its play, had done $57 million. It's probably now up to $60 million. But if you take away P&A, in the United States, prints and advertising costs about $50 million to $60 million. You take away P&A, you take away production costs, you take away distribution costs, you're now saying you're still in the red. So you've got to figure out a way for these films to break above $100 million. And I think they can do it. We've certainly taught some people to do it, and we're still teaching them. So that's part of our How to Succeed in Hollywood Without Losing Your Soul. I was just taken by Amazon. They picked me up at 2:45 a.m. on a Sunday morning, flew me to Greece 2 weeks ago. I got there at 11 a.m. I went to a John Irwin movie and I interviewed all the people Monday and Tuesday, got up at 4 a.m., flew back to LA, got there at 12:30 a.m., and I'm too old to do this. But John Irwin is a good friend, so now he's doing the House of David, and we're hoping with Amazon's backing that they're going to get bigger. 60% of a movie is marketing.
Wow. 60% of the movie is spent on marketing.
Well, that's where the action is. You can have a lot of good movies, like you mentioned, Bloom or whatever, that aren't seen because they're just not, marketed to reach a lot of people. One of my favorite movies is Tree of Wooden Clogs, an Italian movie, and it won the Cannes Film Festival in 1981, and almost nobody has seen it. So you've got to market the movie. You've got to reach people. And when I did The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, we did just a gigantic portion. We were number one on CBS, and we know how to market movies.
Yeah, amazing. So you're saying that Jesus Revolution, as of today, probably hasn't even made a profit yet. They're probably still trying to break even because of production costs.
Probably. Yep.
Wow, that's a real that is a real challenge, isn't it?
It is, but it's also, I look at it differently. I had one friend who was arguably the richest man in Texas. He made a movie. It made only $2.5 or $3 million. I said, does it bother you? And he said, no, I've got too much money. It doesn't bother me. I said, why'd you make the movie? And he said, well, I made it to reach people with the gospel. I said, well, at $2 million, at $10 a ticket, you reach 200,000 people in a country of 360 million people. You didn't reach people with the gospel. So we're talking about how to succeed. And the key to success is learning that this is a business, this is a craft, is learning the principles of that craft, of learning how to reach a broader audience, learning how to ignite an audience. So we try to teach them to get to that point that they want to reach. For instance, some friends of mine, Angel Studios, did a really good film, Sound of Freedom. It did over $200 million. But then they did Cabrini and didn't. So they came to my office. We've met often, and we went through the training of what they needed to do to reach an audience for that type of movie.
Excellent. And just to remind our audience, our listeners, what was Sound of Freedom about, the one that made $200 million? What was the essence of that plot?
Sound of Freedom was Jen Caviezel was a special agent, and a little girl says that her brother, she escapes from sex trafficking from, I guess it was from Colombia. I can't remember exactly right now. I read the script 10 years before, saw the movie, we gave it an award. But anyway, it was about him going and rescue these kids from trafficking in the jungles of South America. So it was really an action-adventure film. There are a lot of films we get that are Christian films on trafficking, usually about some pastor like yourself up in Thailand who's helping kids. It's important stories, but they don't write them to be exciting.
Yeah.
There are movies, and then people say to me, well, you can't make money on this movie. Well, it made $220 million at the box office. Taken made about $600 million at the box office. So you can make no subject is out of bounds. It's not what you say, it's how you say it, and it's how you market it.
So true. I mean, it's the same
This is pretty inside baseball. I'm not sure you want to hear all.
Well, I'm finding it really interesting, but it's the same in the church world because the gospel is timeless, it's powerful, it can change any life. But we both know there are people and churches who communicate the gospel in such a way that no one wants to get saved. So there's definitely a way to communicate the message. And it says in the book of Acts that the apostles spoke in such a way that many turned to the Lord. So it's the same whether you're writing a book or a script for a movie or making a movie. There's a way to communicate, isn't there, that engages your audience.
Absolutely. And you can learn that. And Paul, of course, was teaching people that, and that's exactly what he did.
Well, let's segue from that to, because we're going to round up in a couple of minutes, to your trip to Sydney. You're obviously teaching down there in Sydney. Tell us what you'll be teaching in your time in Sydney.
Well, I'm going to take the morning of the 12th and teach young filmmakers the basic principles of how to succeed in Hollywood without losing your soul. And then I'm going to talk to people who produced a movie in the afternoon about how that movie is going to do at the box office. We analyze movies. I don't know how deep I should get. We analyze movies from 150 criteria to show what they're going to do. So the basic criteria is ontology. That's the nature of being. If you're, I grew up as a non-believer, so my mother was sort of into the New Age when the New Age wasn't existing anymore. So that means that nothing is real. And if nothing is real, it doesn't matter if somebody dies, somebody gets sick, whatever else. And she died at a young age. If you're a Marxist, and I was a Marxist at one point, I was saved by Jesus, not because of myself. If you're a Marxist, you believe everything is matter. If it's matter and you kill a few Ukrainians, what does it matter? They're just fertilizer, which is not true. But as Christians, we believe in a real world with real pain, with real suffering that needs a real Savior. And that's because God so loved the world. He loves each person. Each person has meaning. So that's a different whole nature of ontology. We believe that you can really know the truth and make it known, all the things that you were just saying. So we go through all of these different criteria. We look at movies. The more they cohere to a Christian worldview, the better they do. Now I'm going to give you an example that's going to surprise you. The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson, who lived in Australia for a while, it did better per capita in Saudi Arabia than it did in the United States.
Amazing. Say that again. It did better in Saudi Arabia per capita than it did in the US. That's incredible.
And the reason that I give for that is that everybody, everywhere in the world, understands that their life is not an illusion, that their life does matter, and they want a Savior.
Man, that's deep.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
It's incredible, yeah. So tell me more about this criteria you use to select or to identify what's going to work and what's not going to work in movies.
Well, we try to make it simple for people. So we have, entertainment stars for entertainment quantity, 4 stars being the highest. We do acceptability from -4 to +4. And we're getting more and more +4 films, really clean, wholesome. They've got to be Christ-centered films from major studios. So you're getting more of that all the time. I just did 10 movie guide programs, and one of them was on The Forge, which is coming out from Sony Pictures, which is extremely Christian. And another one is on Wonderoos and some of these children films, and actually Harold and his magical crown, which is fun because he's looking for his creator. And the narrator is telling him that he can find his creator if he goes through the real door into the real world. So it's just what we just described. So a lot of these movies are moving in that direction of trying to capture the heart of man by capturing the right values.
Yeah, amazing. If you've just joined us, I'm listening and talking with Ted Bayer. He founded movieguide.org. It's a movie review website. It's got so many resources on there. 89 million people access it. 1 in 3 parents in the US use it to look at movies that are wholesome for their families to watch. And I encourage everyone listening right now, check out movieguide.org. It was founded by Ted Bayer, has joined us today on 2020. Ted, I want to thank you so much for joining us on 2020 and sharing a little bit of your story and a little bit of your wisdom. It's been fascinating.
Well, now someday you've got to come to LA and come to one of our big Hollywood Christian Oscars and enjoy yourself and go on the red carpet and interview these people for yourself. We'd love to have you.
Well, I'm going to take you up on that, Ted. Looking forward to it. God bless you, brother, and we'll talk soon.
God bless. Have a great day.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.